At my sister-in-law's baby shower she grinned. Still barren, huh? Mother-in-law added, Paisley's giving us our first grandchild. I just smiled. Then a man walked in holding a baby and said, I'm Natalie's husband. Jaws dropped. My sister-in-law gasped. My mother-in-law sat down. I just fixed my hair. Paisley, my younger sister-in-law, stood at the center of the baby shower like she was hosting a royal coronation. One hand under her belly, the other holding a sparkling juice flute. She looked right at me. Then she tilted her head and smiled sweetly, the kind of smile that hides poison. Still barren, huh? She asked, lightly, almost joking, but with just enough volume to make sure the gossip-hungry ants heard every word. The room didn't go silent. That would have been merciful. Instead, conversations paused mid-sentence, heads turned, and I felt 20 pairs of eyes burning into my skin. My coffee cup trembled in my hands, the ceramic suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. I forced my lips into what I hoped resembled a smile, but my face felt frozen, like I was wearing a mask that didn't quite fit. Oh, Paisley, I managed, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. You're so funny. If you've ever felt overlooked or underestimated, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need to hear that their worth isn't defined by others. Now let's see how this story unfolds. But she wasn't done. She never was. Paisley had perfected the art of the public takedown, always disguised as concern or humor. She turned to the room, her audience captivated, and shrugged with exaggerated innocence. I mean, it's been what, 6 years now? I just thought maybe there was news. 6 years. She said it like it was a prison sentence. Like my marriage had an expiration date and I was already past it. I watched my mother-in-law, Patricia, rise from her cushioned chair in the corner, her face lighting up with the kind of joy reserved for moments of personal victory. Well, Patricia announced, her voice carrying across the room like a town crier, Paisley's giving us our first grandchild. She clasped her hands together, and I swear I saw actual tears forming in her eyes. Finally, the family name will continue. The family name. As if I hadn't been trying to carry it for years. As if my empty womb was a personal insult to their precious legacy. I felt my cheeks burn, but I kept smiling, nodding along like I was genuinely thrilled to be witnessing my own public execution. Derek, my husband, stood near the gift table holding a beer and chatting with Paisley's husband, Marcus. When I looked his way, hoping for even a small gesture of support, he caught my eye briefly. Then he did something that will haunt me forever. He smirked. Not maliciously, but with this satisfied little expression, like he was watching a mildly entertaining show. Like my humiliation was amusing rather than devastating. Nat's always been the career woman, Derek said to Marcus, loud enough for me to hear. Different priorities, you know? Different priorities. As if my wanting children was just a hobby I'd outgrown. As if the 3 miscarriages we'd never talked about publicly were just minor inconveniences. As if the fertility treatments I'd endured alone because he refused to get tested were just me being dramatic. That I excused myself to the bathroom, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. The hallway was mercifully empty, lined with family photos that suddenly felt like evidence of my failure. Derek's childhood pictures, his parents' wedding photos, his grandparents' anniversary portraits. All showcasing a family tree I was apparently too defective to contribute to. I in the bathroom mirror. I looked at myself and barely recognized the woman staring back. When had I become so small? So apologetic for taking up space? I'd always been the one who spoke up in meetings, who negotiated my own salary, who never backed down from a challenge. But somehow in this house, around these people, I'd shrunk into someone who smiled politely while being torn apart. I splashed cold water on my face and returned to the party. The gift opening ceremony was in full swing, and Patricia was documenting every moment with her phone, narrating for social media. And here's the little outfit from Aunt Margaret, she cooed, holding up a tiny pink dress. Our precious granddaughter is going to be so spoiled. Our granddaughter. Not Paisley's daughter. Not the baby. Our granddaughter. The possessiveness in Patricia's voice made my stomach turn. I'd been married to Derek for 6 years and I'd never been our anything. The drive home was suffocating. Derek drove while scrolling through his phone at red lights, completely absorbed in whatever was on his screen. I sat in the passenger seat, my hands folded in my lap, staring out at the suburban landscape we'd chosen together when we were still planning our future family. You okay? Derek asked, but his tone suggested he was asking out of obligation rather than genuine concern. Fine, I replied, because what else could I say? That I felt like I'd been publicly executed? That his mother had essentially announced my replacement? That his silence had been louder than any insult? Good, he said, returning his attention to his phone. Paisley's really glowing, isn't she? Pregnancy suits her. I wanted to remind him that I'd been glowing 2-3 different times before my body betrayed me. But those conversations never went anywhere. Derek had a gift for making my pain feel inconvenient, like I was being overly sensitive about perfectly normal biological processes. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every moment of the afternoon. The laughter, the pointed comments, the way everyone had looked at me with a mixture of pity and judgment. I thought about calling my sister, but what would I say? That I'd been humiliated at a baby shower? That my husband had watched it happen with amusement? Instead, I found myself thinking about something that had happened years ago. I'd been at a park eating lunch alone on a bench when a little girl on the playground fell off the monkey bars. She hit the ground hard, and for a moment I thought she might cry. But she just sat there, brushed off her knees, and looked up at her mother with determination. "You're strong, baby girl," her mother had said, helping her up. "We rise." The little girl had nodded seriously like she was memorizing the words, then marched right back to those monkey bars. I'd watched her try again and again, falling twice more before finally making it across. Her mother had cheered like she'd just won the Olympics, that I'd written those words on a sticky note when I got home that day. "We rise." I'd stuck it to my bathroom mirror, though I'd never really understood why at the time. Now, lying in the dark, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly, but a kind of quiet determination I hadn't felt in years. The next morning I opened my laptop and found myself scrolling through old emails. There, buried in my personal folder, was a message I'd never fully processed. It was from an adoption agency I'd contacted over a year ago, during one of my darkest moments. The email was brief but life-changing. They had a baby girl just born in need of a home. My hand trembled as I reached for my phone. This wasn't about revenge or proving anyone wrong. This was about rising. About refusing to let their narrow definition of family define mine. About taking control of my own story. I dialed the number, my heart racing with something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. The adoption counselor answered on the third ring, and I almost hung up. My courage was slipping away like sand through my fingers. But something in her voice, warm, patient, understanding, made me stay on the line. "I called about a year ago," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "About adoption. There was a baby girl." "Of course," she said gently. "Let me pull up your file. Natalie, right? I remember you. Are you ready to move forward?" Ready. Was I ready to become a mother through paperwork instead of pregnancy? Ready to love a child who would never carry my DNA? Ready to prove to myself that family wasn't about blood but about choice? "Yes," I said, and meant it completely. The process moved faster than I expected. There were forms to sign, background checks to complete, home visits to schedule. But first I needed to handle the paperwork for a different kind of ending. I found Margaret Chen's law office through a simple online search. A solo practitioner who specialized in family law and had 5-star reviews praising her discretion. Her office was small but comfortable, with soft lighting and tissue boxes strategically placed on every surface. Margaret herself was probably in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She reminded me of my favorite high school teacher, someone who saw potential in people even when they couldn't see it themselves. "What brings you here today?" she asked, pouring me tea from a ceramic pot without asking if I wanted any. I told her everything. The years of trying, the miscarriages, the fertility treatments Derek had refused to participate in. The way his family treated me like a defective appliance they couldn't return. The baby shower humiliation that had finally broken something inside me that I didn't want to fix. Margaret listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or making notes. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me carefully. "You know," she said finally, "I've been doing this for 30 years. I can usually tell within the first 5 minutes whether someone is making a decision out of anger or out of clarity. You're angry, yes, but underneath that you're crystal clear about what you want." He was right. For the first time in years, I knew exactly what I wanted. Not what Derek wanted or what his family expected or what society deemed appropriate. What I wanted. I can file the papers quietly, Margaret continued. We'll serve him at work, keep everything as private as possible until it's finalized. You'll have time to get your affairs in order. Affairs in order. Such a polite way of saying I needed to escape. That evening I started what I would later think of as my invisible exodus. Derek was so absorbed in his evening routine, dinner, TV, phone scrolling, that he didn't notice me taking a few items from our shared dresser and slipping them into a gym bag I kept in the closet. A couple of sweaters, some underwear, the jewelry my grandmother had left me. Small things. Things he'd never inventoried. I did this for 2 weeks. Each night while he watched sports or played video games, I would quietly remove another piece of my life from our shared space. Photo albums from my childhood, books I'd collected over the years, the coffee mug my sister had given me for my birthday. By the 3rd week, I realized he hadn't noticed that half my belongings were gone. The adoption agency called on a Tuesday. The baby had been born the night before, and the birth mother had specifically requested me after reviewing my profile. Could I come to the hospital Thursday morning? I told Derek I had a client meeting out of town and might be late getting home. He barely looked up from his phone. He said, I'll probably grab dinner with Marcus anyway. Marcus, Paisley's husband. They'd become closer since the baby shower, bonding over their wives' pregnancies, or in my case, lack thereof. I wondered if Derek had already started thinking of me in past tense. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors. The birth mother, Sarah, was young, maybe 22, with tired eyes and a brave smile. She'd made her decision months ago, she told me. She wanted her daughter to have opportunities she couldn't provide. I picked you, she said, because you wrote in your letter that you'd been waiting a long time to be a mother. I could feel how much you wanted this. When the nurse placed the baby in my arms, everything else disappeared. The divorce papers, the humiliation, the years of disappointment. None of it mattered. She was so small, wrapped in a hospital blanket with tiny fists pressed against her cheeks. She had dark hair and the most serious expression I'd ever seen on a newborn. Hello, little one, I whispered. I'm your mama. She opened her eyes briefly as if she was checking me out, then seemed to decide I was acceptable. Her little hand wrapped around my finger with surprising strength. What will you name her? Sarah asked. I didn't hesitate. Hope. Because that's what she was. Not just a baby but a promise. A future I was choosing instead of waiting for permission to have. I stayed at the hospital for 3 days, learning how to change diapers and interpret different types of cries. The adoption paperwork was signed, making it official. Hope was mine and I was hers. During those 3 days, Derek called twice. Once to ask when I'd be home and once to tell me he was going to a baseball game with Marcus. On Thursday evening, I loaded Hope's car seat into my Honda and drove to my friend Julie's house. Julie had been my college roommate, and when I'd called her the week before, she'd immediately offered her spare bedroom. Stay as long as you need, she'd said. I've been waiting for you to leave him for years. That first night, sleeping on Julie's couch with Hope in a bassinet beside me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the absence of conflict but the presence of rightness. I was where I belonged, with who I belonged with. Derek didn't call until Friday afternoon. Where are you? He asked, and I could hear confusion rather than concern in his voice. I'm not coming home, I said simply. What do you mean? Is this about the baby shower thing? Paisley was just joking around. I'm divorcing you, Derek. The papers should be served Monday. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. You can't be serious, he said finally. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. But we're married. We have a house. We have plans. You have plans, I corrected. I have a daughter. I hung up before he could respond, then turned off my phone. Hope was sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, completely unaware that her existence had just rewritten both our stories. For the first time in years, I was exactly where I wanted to be. The weeks turned into months and I discovered something remarkable. I was good at this. Really good. Hope slept through the night by 6 weeks, smiled at 2 months and rolled over just before her 3rd month birthday. Every milestone felt like a small victory, not just for her but for me. I was doing what Derek's family said I'd never do, and I was excelling at it. Julie's house became our temporary sanctuary for 8 months while I saved money and figured out our next steps. Hope's laughter filled the space, and Julie would often joke that we'd brought more joy to her home than it had seen in years. But I knew we needed our own place, somewhere we could build our real life together. I found Millbrook by accident, driving through small towns on a weekend when Hope was particularly fussy. It was the kind of place where everyone waved at strangers, where the downtown consisted of a coffee shop, a bookstore, and a hardware store that had been family-owned for 3 generations. Perfect for starting over. The apartment above Petals and Stems flower shop was small but filled with natural light. The landlord, Henry Rodriguez, was a widower in his 70s who'd owned the building for 40 years. When I explained my situation, single mother looking for a quiet place to raise my daughter, his eyes softened. The previous tenant left because of the baby crying upstairs, he said, watching Hope sleep peacefully in her carrier. But I think this little one might be different. The rent was reasonable and Henry included utilities. More importantly, he fixed things immediately when they broke, never made me feel like an imposition, and always brought Hope a small flower from the shop downstairs when he came to check on anything. Our little apartment became a cocoon of routine and discovery. I'd wake up to Hope's babbling, never crying, just chatting to herself in baby language as if she was planning her day. I'd make coffee while she had her bottle. Then we'd sit by the big window overlooking Main Street and watch the town wake up. By the time Hope was walking, I'd established myself as the go-to babysitter for several working parents in town. What started as watching 2 kids while their mothers worked had grown into something bigger. Parents began specifically seeking me out, drawn by word-of-mouth recommendations and Hope's obvious contentment. "You have a gift," said Carmen, a nurse whose twin boys I watched 3 days a week. They actually asked to come to Miss Natalie's house. Miss Natalie. That's what the children called me, and hearing it never got old. I wasn't Mrs. Anybody anymore. I was Miss Natalie, and that felt exactly right. The daycare grew organically. I rearranged our living room to accommodate more children, invested in age-appropriate toys and books, and created learning corners for different activities. The state licensing process was thorough but manageable, and within a year, Miss Natalie's home daycare was officially recognized and fully booked. Hope thrived in this environment. She was naturally social, and having other children around brought out qualities in her that amazed me daily. She was protective of the younger ones, creative in her play, and possessed an independence that both impressed and occasionally terrified me. On her 3rd birthday, I planned a small party with the daycare kids and a few neighbors who'd become friends. Hope woke up that morning with her hair sticking up in every direction and immediately announced, "It's my birthday. I'm the boss today." She spent an hour before the party making herself a crown from yellow construction paper, decorating it with stickers and crayons. When she placed it on her head and looked at herself in the mirror, she grinned and said, "Perfect. Now everyone will know I'm important." Watching her that day, confident, joyful, completely secure in her place in the world, I realized she had no idea who I used to be. She'd never known the woman who apologized for existing, who smiled while being torn apart, who waited for permission to live her own life. To Hope, I was simply Mama, strong, capable, and unshakable. That realization led to a decision I'd been contemplating for months. I called Margaret Chin and scheduled an appointment to discuss legally changing Hope's last name to match the one I'd carried during my marriage. Not out of spite or revenge, but as a gift to Hope, and perhaps a small act of poetic justice for myself. "You're sure about this?" Margaret asked, reviewing the paperwork. "Once it's done, she'll legally carry that family name." "I'm sure," I said. "They said I'd never carry on their precious family legacy. But Hope will. She'll carry it forward with honor and strength they never imagined possible." The name change was finalized on a Tuesday in October. That evening, I showed Hope her new birth certificate, explaining that her full name was now Hope Rodriguez Miller, Rodriguez being my maiden name, Miller being the name I'd once shared with Derek. "That's a big name," she said seriously, studying the official document. "It's a strong name," I corrected. "For a strong girl." 2 weeks later, I was rushing through downtown with Hope, late for a pediatrician appointment, when I collided with someone carrying a large coffee. The cup went flying, sending espresso across the sidewalk and splashing both of us. "Oh gosh, I'm so sorry." The voice was warm, genuinely distressed. "Are you hurt? Is she okay?" I looked up to see a man about my age with kind brown eyes and coffee stains spreading across his work shirt. He was already pulling napkins from his pocket, trying to clean up the mess while checking on Hope, who was giggling at the excitement. "We're fine," I assured him. "Really? These things happen." "Let me buy you a replacement coffee," he insisted. "And maybe lunch?" "I feel terrible." His name was Daniel, and he was in town to assess the public library's children's section for a renovation project. He specialized in making libraries more family-friendly, designing spaces that encouraged literacy and community engagement. We ended up talking for 2 hours while Hope played with the library's puzzle collection. That he was a single father too. His ex-wife had remarried and moved across the country, leaving him to raise their 8-year-old son Marcus mostly alone. We compared notes on bedtime routines, picky eating, and the challenge of explaining adult concepts to young minds. "It's hard doing it alone," he said, watching Hope carefully stack blocks while Marcus built an elaborate tower beside her. "It's different doing it alone," I corrected. "Not necessarily harder. Just quieter in some ways, louder in others." He laughed, understanding exactly what I meant. Daniel started finding excuses to visit Millbrook after his library project was finished. A consultation here, a follow-up meeting there. Always stopping by the daycare afterward, usually with coffee and pastries from the shop downtown. Hope took to him immediately, which surprised me. She was typically cautious with new adults, preferring to observe before engaging. But with Daniel, she was chatty and playful from day one. "Danny's funny," she told me after his 3rd visit. "He builds good towers and he listens when I talk." 6 months later, Hope made an announcement that changed everything. She and Daniel were building an elaborate block castle when she looked up at him and said, "You can be my daddy if you want." The blocks tumbled from Daniel's hands. He looked at her, then at me, his eyes wide with surprise and something deeper. "Hope, maybe, or joy." "I would be honored," he said quietly, "if your mama thinks that's okay." Hope looked at me expectantly. "Is it okay, Mama?" I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady. That's when I knew Daniel wasn't just someone passing through our lives. He was home. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday, tucked between bills and advertisements in my mailbox. Cream-colored cardstock with silver script, announcing Paisley's 2nd baby shower. My cousin Rebecca had sent it, along with a handwritten note. "Thought you should know. You don't have to come, but I wanted you to have the choice." I stared at that invitation for a full minute, standing in my kitchen while Hope played with her toy trains on the floor. 4 years had passed since I'd walked out of that world. 4 years of building something beautiful from nothing. And yet, seeing those familiar names on the guest list, Patricia, Aunt Margaret, Cousin Linda, all the women who'd witnessed my public humiliation, stirred something unexpected in me. Not anger. Not revenge. Something quieter but more powerful. Closure. "What's that, Mama?" Hope asked, noticing the fancy paper in my hands. "An invitation to a party," I said, still processing my own reaction. "Are we going?" I looked down at her bright, curious face. My daughter, who radiated confidence and joy, who had never known what it felt like to be made small by other people's words. She deserved to see where she came from, and more importantly, how far we'd traveled from there. "Yes," I said, surprising myself. "I think we are." Daniel found me that evening on our back porch, staring at the invitation again. We'd been together for 8 months now, moving slowly and deliberately, building something solid. He'd proposed 2 weeks earlier with a ring hidden in Hope's lunchbox and a note that simply read, "Let's give Hope our forever." I'd said yes because I wasn't looking for rescue anymore. I was choosing partnership. "Penny for your thoughts?" he said, settling into the chair beside me. I handed him the invitation and watched his expression shift as he read. He knew the whole story by now, had held me through the nights when old wounds still ached, had celebrated every small victory as Hope and I continued healing. "You sure about this?" he asked finally. "I need them to see who I became," I said. "Not for them. For me." The morning of the shower, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, applying lipstick with steady hands. Ruby red, the same shade I'd worn on my wedding day 6 years ago. But this time I wasn't wearing it to please anyone else. This time it was war paint. Hope twirled in her new yellow dress, a soft cotton sundress that brought out the gold flecks in her eyes. Around her neck was a delicate chain with a small pendant engraved with her initials. HRM Hope Rodriguez Miller. The name they'd said I'd never carry on, now worn proudly by my brilliant daughter. Daniel looked handsome in his charcoal button-up, nervous but supportive. He'd insisted on coming not as backup but as family. Because that's what we were now. A family of choice built on love rather than obligation. The country club looked exactly as I remembered. Manicured lawns, pretentious architecture, parking lots full of luxury cars. But walking toward the entrance I felt different. My heels clicked confidently on the pavement. My shoulders were straight. Hope skipped beside me, chattering about the pretty flowers in the garden. "Remember," Daniel said quietly as we reached the door, "we're not here to prove anything. We're just here." The party was in the same room where my humiliation had taken place 4 years earlier. Pink and gold decorations, round tables draped in lace, women in pastel dresses holding mimosas and exchanging gossip. The sound hit me first, high-pitched laughter, the clink of glasses, conversations about private schools and vacation homes. Then the conversation stopped. It happened in waves like ripples across water. The women closest to the entrance noticed us first, their chatter dying mid-sentence. Then others turned to see what had captured their attention. Within moments the entire room was staring. I hadn't said a word, hadn't made any grand gesture. I was simply there holding my daughter's hand, standing beside the man I loved. But my presence seemed to suck all the air from the room. Derek was near the gift table wearing a polo shirt that was slightly too tight, his hair thinning more than I remembered. He was holding a beer mid-conversation with Marcus when he spotted me. The bottle slipped from his hand, hitting the floor with a crash that made everyone jump. "Oops." Hope giggled. "Someone made a mess." Patricia, my former mother-in-law, was sitting at the head table in a powder blue dress, her hair styled in the same perfect waves she'd worn for years. When she saw me, her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, then something that looked almost like fear. She sat down heavily as if her legs had suddenly stopped working. But it was Paisley's reaction that satisfied me most. The guest of honor, radiant in pink maternity wear, her second pregnancy announced with the same fanfare as her first. When she saw me, the color drained from her face completely. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed, then opened again like a fish gasping for air. "Hi," Hope said brightly, apparently unbothered by the strange atmosphere. "I'm Hope Rodriguez Miller." The name landed like a small bomb. I watched realization dawn on their faces. Not just that I was there, not just that I had a child, but that she carried the family name they'd insisted I could never pass on. "Natalie," Patricia finally managed, her voice strangled. We didn't expect." "Rebecca invited us," I said simply, my voice steady and warm. "We brought a gift." I handed Hope the carefully wrapped children's book we'd selected. A story about a little girl who builds her own castle. Hope trotted over to the gift table and placed it carefully among the other presents, completely unconscious of the drama swirling around her. "She's beautiful," said Aunt Margaret, the first to recover her composure. "How old is she?" "4," I replied. "She'll be starting kindergarten in the fall." "And this is?" Patricia's eyes moved to Daniel, her question hanging in the air. "Daniel," he said, extending his hand with easy confidence. "I'm Natalie's fiancé. It's nice to meet Hope's extended family." The word fiancé rippled through the crowd like electricity. I hadn't planned to announce our engagement this way, but Daniel's matter-of-fact delivery was perfect. No drama, no grand gestures. Just the simple truth of our happiness that we stayed for 20 minutes. Long enough to be polite, short enough to make our point. Hope charmed everyone she met, completely unconscious of the undercurrents swirling around her. She complimented Paisley's dress, asked about the baby, and helped herself to a cookie from the dessert table with the confidence of someone who belonged wherever she chose to be. When we prepared to leave, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the one who'd been broken in this same building years ago. This woman stood tall, smiled genuinely, and radiated the kind of contentment that couldn't be faked. I adjusted my lipstick, still perfect after all these years, and smoothed Hope's hair. "Ready to go home?" I asked her. "Yes," she said, slipping her hand into mine. "That was fun, but I like our house better." As we walked toward the door, I heard Patricia call my name. I turned back, curious. "She's lovely," she said quietly, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely sincere. "You did well." I nodded graciously. "Thank you." Because the truth was, I had done well. Better than any of them had imagined possible. And that knowledge was worth every moment of pain I'd endured to get here. The drive home from the baby shower was filled with Hope's chatter about the pretty decorations and the fancy cookies with sprinkles. Daniel reached over and squeezed my hand as we pulled into our driveway, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my palm. "You okay?" he asked softly. I looked back at Hope, who was already unbuckling herself and planning which toys she wanted to play with, then at our little house with its cheerful yellow shutters and flower boxes. The evening light was golden, casting everything in a warm glow that made our simple life look like something from a magazine. "I'm perfect," I said, and meant it completely. A week later, my phone rang while I was preparing snacks for the next day's daycare kids. The number was one I hadn't seen in 4 years, but I recognized it immediately. Derek. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. What could he possibly have to say after all this time? "Hello, Derek." "Natalie." His voice sounded older, more uncertain than I remembered. I wanted to call after seeing you last week. You looked good. Really good." I continued cutting apple slices, the phone balanced between my ear and shoulder. "Thank you. I've been thinking a lot since then. About us. About what we had." He paused and I could hear him breathing heavily. "I miss it. I miss you. Maybe we could, I don't know, have coffee sometime? Talk." The knife stilled in my hand. For a moment I was transported back to all those years ago when his attention would have meant everything to me. When I would have dropped everything for the possibility of his approval, his love, his return. But that woman was gone. "Derek," I said gently, "what we had doesn't exist anymore. It ended the day I left. But we were married. We had history. We had a marriage that made me smaller every day I was in it," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "We had a history of me trying to earn love that should have been freely given. That's not something I want to rebuild." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. "I never meant to hurt you," he said finally. "I know you didn't," I replied, and I meant it. But intent doesn't erase impact. "I'm not angry anymore, Derek. I'm just done." "The little girl," he said suddenly. "She's beautiful." "Is she?" "She's my daughter," I said firmly. "Legally adopted. Daniel is her guardian. You have no claim to her, no rights regarding her, and no place in her life. I need you to understand that completely." I heard him intake sharply. "But she has my family's name. She has the name I chose to give her. And she'll carry it with honor, something I couldn't do while I was part of your family." After I hung up, I realized my hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. The conversation that would have destroyed me years ago had simply been a conversation. I felt nothing but a quiet satisfaction that I'd spoken my truth without cruelty, but with absolute clarity. 3 months later, the Millbrook Gazette ran a feature story about local businesses supporting working families. My daycare was highlighted as a beacon of nurturing care in our community. The article included a photo of me reading to a group of children, Hope prominently featured in the front row with her arm around a younger boy who was new to our program. "Miss Natalie's home daycare has become an essential resource for working parents," the article read. Her innovative approach to early childhood development and her genuine love for the children in her care have made her a trusted name throughout the community. I framed the article and hung it by the front door, not because I needed external validation, but because it felt important for the children and parents to see that our little space was recognized and valued. Henry from downstairs brought me a bouquet of sunflowers to celebrate, and several parents surprised me with a small cake during pickup time. That evening, while Hope was having her bath, I sat at my kitchen table reading thank you cards from parents. Mrs. Chin wrote about how her son had learned to share in my care. The Martinez family thanked me for helping their daughter transition from Spanish to English with patience and creativity. Each note was a reminder that I hadn't just built a business. I'd built a community. The next week, Hope came home from her pre-K program with a special assignment. Each child had been asked to create a poster about their family for the classroom family wall. "I need to draw my family," she announced, spreading out construction paper and crayons on the coffee table. "Mrs. Thompson says it should show the people who love me most." I watched her work, her little tongue poking out in concentration. She drew 3 figures holding hands under a rainbow. A woman with brown hair, me, a man with kind eyes, Daniel, and a little girl with pigtails, herself. Above us she wrote in careful kindergarten letters, "My Family by Hope Rodriguez Miller." "Tell me about your picture," I said, sitting beside her. "That's you and that's Daddy Daniel and that's me," she said, pointing to each figure. "We're happy because we're together." "What do you love most about our family?" I asked the same question from her assignment sheet. She thought for a moment, her crayon pausing mid-stroke. "We laugh. A lot. And when someone is sad we hug them until they feel better. And Daddy Daniel makes the best pancakes and you sing the prettiest songs and nobody ever yells." Nobody ever yells. Such a simple statement, but it told me everything I needed to know about the life we'd built together. Hope had never known chaos disguised as normal. She'd never experienced love that came with conditions. She'd never been made to feel like her joy was an inconvenience. That night after Hope was asleep, I found myself in the bathroom, looking at the mirror where I'd once taped a small yellow sticky note. It was still there, though faded now. "We rise." I touched it gently, remembering the woman who'd written those words in desperation, hoping they might somehow become true. She'd been broken and scared, convinced she was fundamentally flawed because she couldn't fit into someone else's definition of worthy. Looking at my reflection now, I saw someone completely different. Not because I'd learned to be perfect, but because I'd learned to be authentically myself. My face showed the gentle lines that came from genuine laughter. My eyes held confidence earned through making hard choices and sticking with them. My smile belonged entirely to me. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't spend energy on revenge fantasies or bitter thoughts. I didn't need Derek's family to acknowledge what they'd lost when they treated me as disposable. I didn't need them to understand what they'd missed when they failed to see my worth. What I'd needed was peace. And I'd found it not by waiting for permission or approval, but by choosing it for myself every single day. I peeled the sticky note from the mirror carefully, then walked to Hope's room. She was sleeping peacefully, her family poster propped against her dresser, still drying. I tucked the note into her baby book, right next to her adoption papers and first daycare photo. Someday when she was older, I'd tell her the story of how we found each other. How sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. How rising isn't about getting revenge on people who underestimate you. It's about building something so beautiful that their opinions become irrelevant. But for now, it was enough that she knew she was loved completely just as she was. And that was the greatest victory of all. If this story of quiet triumph and reclaimed power had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Hope announced her full name at the baby shower, carrying the family legacy they said would never continue. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more inspiring stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.